A Boeing 787 from United Airlines is on final approach for runway 09 left in Paris Charles de Gaulle airport. When they contact tower, they received an unexpected clearance for a sidestep approach to the parallel runway. They question this, but they don't really get any further clarification from the tower. On the ground, an Airbus A320 from Easyjet is just about to line up for takeoff on runway 09 right when they realize that something is about to go really wrong. What is about to happen is a really good example of how easy it is for human error to occur, but it's also a great example of how resilient and how many safety barriers there is in aviation. Stay tuned. This video is brought to you together with Brilliant. Use the link in the description below for your special deal. The incident that we're going to cover today happened on the 20th of July 2020. So this was at the top of the pandemic in Europe, which meant that it was much less aviation traffic going on than normal. It happened in Paris Charles de Gaulle, which is the main airport in Paris, and Paris Charles de Gaulle has two sets of double runways they use. They either use the southern or the northern setup for arriving and departing. Prior to this incident happening, for the last 2 weeks, they had been using the southern setup, and that has its own tower. So this morning, when this happened at 05:17 local time, the controller that was on duty had just moved into the northern tower that was supposed to be used for the northern configuration with runway 09 left and 09 right. The problem was though that because of the pandemic, this tower had not been used, and the normal position where she would be sitting at was inoperative, right? There was something wrong with it. So the controller found herself sitting on a controller station, which was slightly offset from where she would normally sit, where she would have perfect view over the final for runway 09 right and left. In this case, she was sitting a little bit more towards the east, so the tower itself was blocking her view slightly. The weather on the day was really good. The wind was coming from the east with some light, occasionally gusty winds. It was very good visibility on the ground, only some high clouds. But since this happened very early on in the morning, at time 05:17, it meant that the sun was just risen over the horizon and it was a little bit of moisture in the air. And when you have that kind of situation, you can get a little bit of sun glare as you're coming in for landing. And that was reported by the arriving aircraft as well. On the airport in itself, there was a lot of things going on. The controller had started about an hour earlier, and just about 15 minutes prior to this incident happening, a Boeing 787 from Air France had come in for an approach for runway 09 left. However, due to a technical problem, they had executed the go-around, and after the go-around, they requested to come in and do a non-standard landing on runway 09 right that was primarily used for departures on this day. The reason they wanted to do that is because runway 09 right is a longer runway. On the ground, there was two aircraft that had recently landed on runway 09 left, and they were holding short before they were supposed to cross runway 09 right and awaiting the landing of the Boeing 787 from Air France that had the technical issues. There was also two aircraft at holding point Delta 5 awaiting departure, and the first one in line for departure was a Airbus A320 from Easyjet. When this incident started, the Boeing 787 from United Airlines with call sign United 57 had just transferred over from Paris air traffic control to the Charles de Gaulle tower controller. Now, the Paris air traffic control had previously cleared them to initiate the ILS approach for runway 09 left, which is what the crew had briefed for. As soon as they switched over to the tower controller came with the following message. United 57, bonjour, continued approach runway 09 right, you cleared to land runway 09 right, surface wind 010 degrees, 9 knots, gusting 21. The pilots of United 57 found that a little bit strange because they had previously been cleared for the ILS approach runway 09 left, and that's what they were expecting to land at. So the first officer, who was pilot monitoring at the time, called the tower controller back up and said, understand, clear to land runway 09 right, sidestep runway 09 right, United 57. And to this, he never received any further response back from the tower controller. So at this point, it's really important to kind of take a step back and look at what's happening here. So if we start with the tower controller, she has been dealing with the Air France 787 that has had their technical problem and has now been cleared in to land for runway 09 right. She also is awaiting to give clearance to the 2 aircraft that is waiting to cross runway 09 right, and she has 2 aircraft awaiting departure runway 09 right. This means that in her head everything is going on runway 09 right. The second thing that's worth mentioning is that the pilot for United 57 was very correctly questioning the fact that they were being cleared to land on a different runway than they were doing the approach to. But they were coming from America, and the phraseology that he used was understand, clear to land runway 09 right, sidestep runway 09 right. And the use of the word understand is not used in Europe to a great extent. Instead, we tend to use the wording confirm. So it is likely that if he would have said confirm, clear to land runway 09 right, it would have raised some alarm clocks in the tower controller. The wording confirm means that you have to really think through the clearance that you've just given. But the wording understand might just have sounded like a confirmation for the controller. The other thing that also probably played a part here is that United is an American company flown by American pilots, and in the United States the sidestep maneuver, which is where you're doing an approach to one runway but then you switch over and you land on a parallel runway, is quite often used. There's something that happens fairly regularly. So the American pilots would not necessarily have thought that there was anything strange with this clearance. On the other hand, here in Europe, this happens very, very rarely. And if this would have happened to me in my cockpit, I wouldn't have even been able to accept it, because you are required to do a completely different brief for this. There are different minima that apply. And in this case, runway 09 right threshold is actually closer to the aircraft than runway 09 left, which would have required a steeper descent rate in order to stabilize the aircraft on final. In fact, it would have needed more than 1,000 feet per minute descent rate, which is something that in my SOPs we have to pre-brief. Anyway, the United Airlines 787 on final, they discussed this, they didn't get any further clarification, and as this was happening, the Boeing 787 in front of them from Air France was actually landing on runway 09 right. So the captain on the United aircraft, who was pilot flying, he quickly looked at it, he said, yep, I'll be able to do this. Within their SOPs, they were okay to do a descent with more than 1,000 feet per minute. So he saw that he could just disconnect the autopilot and do a visual maneuver over to runway 09 right, which is what they decided to do. Now, as the United crew is starting this maneuver, the Boeing 787 from Air France have just landed runway 09 right. And the tower controller, unaware of the mistake that she has just made, clears the Airbus A320 from Easyjet to line up and wait runway 09 right. Now, the pilot monitoring on the Easyjet aircraft, is the captain in this case, sitting to the left in the flight deck, is doing something that we always do before we enter or cross a runway, which is to check the extended descent line runway in both directions prior to entering the runway. And he looks out and he sees the Boeing 787 from United Airlines on final to what he believes is runway 09 left. Because you have to understand that when you're sitting in an aircraft and you're watching an aircraft on final to a parallel runway, it is very, very hard to notice if there's any difference. You know, basically if that aircraft is coming into final on your runway or on the parallel runway. And he sees it, he doesn't think that there's anything strange with that, and they continue to enter the runway. United Airlines 57 is now in the middle of the sidestep procedure, which means that they're increasing their descent rate and they're turning slightly to the right. What happens now is that the captain in the Easyjet Airbus that is about to enter the runway makes a second look down the center line. And when he does this, he realizes that the Boeing 787 on final is now actually turning towards the right, turning towards his runway. The United Airlines 787 at this point is only about 0.7 of a mile away from the runway at an altitude of about 300 feet. The Easyjet aircraft at this point has actually entered runway 09 right, but they haven't lined up fully with the center line. Instead, they're at a perpendicular angle to the center line. And the Easyjet captain understands what's about to happen. So he clicks on his radio and he says, "Tower, there's traffic on runway 09 right." Then quickly followed by, "Runway 09 right, go around." So that's a direct order to the aircraft on final to go around. At this point, the crew in the 787 has also spotted the Airbus, which is on their runway that they're about to land on. So they execute the go around and they respond going around runway 09 right, which meant that they would have done the go around even if this call wouldn't have come from the Airbus captain. When this happened, the RIMCAS system inside of the tower, the RIMCAS stands for Runway Incursion Monitoring and Collision Avoidance System, also sounds inside of the tower. And the tower controller understands what has happened. She comes back onto the frequency and issues climb clearance to 4,000 feet for the Boeing 787. And simultaneously, another controller in the tower who had been in a supportive position had also been looking out through the tower, seen the 787 turning towards runway 09 right, and was about to raise the alarm if RIMCAS hadn't done it already. United 57 came as close to 80 feet over the threshold before they started climbing away again. And when they passed the Easyjet Airbus A320 on the runway, they were at an altitude of 300 feet. After the missed approach, they did a completely normal approach in and landed without further incident on runway 09 left. So what's the point of this video then? Why do I choose to share something with you where everything actually worked out okay? Well, there are some really good lessons to learn from this, which I will share with you after this short message from my sponsor. I am so happy to have Brilliant as a sponsor of this episode. Now, Brilliant is an absolutely fantastic online learning platform with hundreds of courses of things, for example, about fundamentals of mathematics, physics, but also these brain puzzles where you have to kind of apply your knowledge. And when you come across something that you don't really understand, they will have a really good explanation for how to understand it so that you can build on that and solve more and more complex problems. I have been working on Brilliant together with my son Lucas, who's 11 years old, and he really loves these brain puzzles and he gets so happy every time that he manages to solve something. If this sounds interesting to you, I would love for you to go down into the video description of this video and click on the Brilliant link. It will give you a whopping 20% off the annual fee of Brilliant, but it's completely free to open it up and check it out. This was rated as a serious incident by the authorities when they were made aware of what had happened. It led to a report, which I have based this video on. It kind of shows to the extent that the authorities will take into consideration incidents where everyone was fine, where nothing actually really happened, but where there are really important lessons to learn. And of course, the main lesson here, when they were interviewing both the crews, but especially the air traffic controller, was the impact that the pandemic has had on safety and the work within the aviation industry. The air traffic controller stated that she definitely felt the onset of skill fade, which is what happens when you are not working much for a prolonged period of time. And that's something that we all in the industry can feel after this last 1.5 years, where we might not have flown as much as we used to, and something that we have to be really aware of and work with. You know, mistakes will happen. They always happen, but our vigilance and the way that we deal with these mistakes, it is what keeps the industry as safe as it is. So in this case, for example, I want to highlight a few things. First of all, the fact that the United Airlines crew did question the clearance, right? They got a clearance, they didn't think that it was correct, they questioned it, and then the further error that happened was that the tower controller didn't understand that this was actually a questioning of the clearance, right? She didn't even respond, which she should have done. But it was really good of the United crew to question it. They should have possibly questioned it even more. And from this report, the authority says that instead of reading back a clearance that you don't really understand, it is better to say confirm clearance, right? Not even reading back what you think you heard, just say confirm clearance to force the air traffic controller to reissue the clearance from the start. That should both raise the awareness of the air traffic controller that, you know, okay, maybe I said something wrong, but it also will give a better picture to the flying crew of what the clearance actually is. So confirm clearance, read it back in its full, and hopefully that will clear out any ambiguity that might be. This also really highlights how important it is as a pilot to check with your own eyes what you're about to do. Even if you've received a clearance from air traffic control to enter a runway, you still have to physically verify that there's no threats to you and your aircraft before you do so. The Easyjet crew, the captain in this case, did an excellent job. He didn't only check once, he checked twice before he entered the runway, and he did see something that he didn't like and immediately made an unambiguous call on the control frequency. So if you remember the video that I did about the Air Canada crew that almost landed on some aircraft standing on the taxiway back in San Francisco, remember that the pilots in those aircraft that were on the taxiway also went out on the frequency, but instead of being unambiguous, they said something along the line with, "Where is this guy going?" which only confused the air traffic controller. Now instead, if you see that something is about to go terribly wrong, it's much better to just go out on the frequency and say something like these guys did, which is go around runway 09 right. That cannot be misunderstood by anyone. And the last thing I want to point out is just the multitude of different safety barriers that are in place in order to keep a potential accident like this from happening. First of all, you have the crew in United Airlines 57. They had the problem of flying into the rising sun, which meant that their visibility was a little bit limited. But once they got down on low altitude, they did see the runway was occupied by the Airbus A320, and they were just about to execute the go-around. And then you have the great job by the pilots in the Easyjet Airbus A320 that, you know, went out on the frequency and told the United Airlines flight to go around. But on top of that, you also have the rimcast system that was activated inside of the tower. Now, that rimcast warning came a little bit late, and the reason for that was because the United Airlines flight changed from runway 09 left to 09 right. And the rimcast system could really only activate when it realized that this aircraft was now suddenly on final to the engaged runway. But the alarm did go off, and that would have triggered a go-around call from air traffic control if they hadn't already done it. And then you had another worker sitting in the tower, monitoring the air traffic, seeing that something was about to go wrong and speaking up. So you have several things that would have stopped this from happening, and this is kind of the main reason I wanted to make this video. I wanted to show you that even though nothing happened in this case, it still was serious enough to issue a report like this, and you can see how the aviation business is working in order to maximize safety in all possible ways. That's all for today, guys. I hope that you've enjoyed this episode, and I hope that you have subscribed to the channel and that you've highlighted the notification bell. And I also know that you guys are sitting out there thinking, where did he get that great t-shirt? And I wonder if he has any more designs. Well, in that case, you're in luck. Under this YouTube video, you have my merch shelf. You should be able to find some cool stuff on there. But you can also go to mentorpilot.com and go to my store there and find loads of other designs. Have an absolutely fantastic day wherever you are, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.